All right, so in the last episode, we talked about how Marcos laundered money and how he had contracts signed. And he said he had 100,000 metric tons, but he only showed 20 metric tons. So in this episode, I'm going to go on and forward what else happened. So one of these contracts that O'Neill signed was with Sheikh Al Fassi of the royal family of Saudi Arabia. And attorney Richard Hirschfield was retained by Marcos to help, and it was an $18 million loan from the Saudi sheikh. And the gold would be held as collateral, and the sheikh would actually loan money on the gold. And it was, Marcos told the sheikh it was from a large cache of gold discovered during World War II, buried by the Japanese. And he offered the golden Buddha statue to the sheikh. But then, since the Buddha statue is a religious Buddhist statue, the sheikh refused to take it. And Imelda said that she told the sheikh that it was actually from the same deposit from the cache that Roger Rojas found, and he donated it to the Marcoses, and it was replaced by a brass overlaid lead statue. So to help the brokerage firm, the Philippine government hired Norman Dowse, a retired U.S. policeman, to help broker this gold, more gold around the country. So he met O'Brien and Clement to arrange the transactions, and these transactions took place in Hong Kong, Switzerland, and New York. And Marcos informed Dacos that the gold in the Central Bank of the Philippines and Coconut Planters Bank equaled 100 metric tons, and it all belonged to him, Marcos. So Marcos was trying to say that all the gold in the National Depository in the Federal Reserve, Philippine Federal Reserve, was all his gold. It wasn't the Philippine government's, it wasn't the Philippine people's, it was his. So he flew to Ilocos Norte in central Philippines to a shrine that was being constructed as a tribute to Marcos. And in this shrine, there was a 3-foot tall Buddha statue, which he thought was 24 karat gold. And it was told the U.S. military actually flew it out of the country later on. So after the IMF came in to do an audit of the central bank, included that the central bank overstated its gold reserves by $264 million in 1981, $823 million in 1982, and $1.2 billion in 1983. So the Philippines government was trying to say they had more gold and they're worth a lot more money than that they were between 81 and 82. And 83. So they also discovered the reserves in the Philippines had fallen $1.1 billion between June and December 93. That means $1.1 billion worth of gold disappeared from the Philippines. And they had no usable assets to pay its foreign debts. So the Philippine government, since it didn't have the gold, could not pay its foreign debts. And now the Philippines was officially bankrupt. And they couldn't double the amount of gold in the deposits, so they actually had to find a way to get money. And Bobby Ongpin, a Marcos crony at the time, later would report that an investigation of Marcos's wealth between 83 and 84, around $3 billion worth of gold was removed out of the Philippines. And this led to many people to wonder how it could have happened. Since 1970, the IMF actually had an officer placed at the central bank. So he was either inept or he was being paid off by the Marcos. Was it $3 billion? Let's see. $3 billion worth of gold disappeared out of the National Depository. So the fact that the Marcos stole large amounts of cash and gold from the Philippines, he never let others do the same. And in 85, a Philippine Supreme Court justice sent a municipal treasury employee to jail for 61 years and another one for 26 years for stealing $5 out of the treasury. So when the Reserve Scandal family finally settled down. Marcos issued a Philippine decree in 1937, eliminated 10-year authorization losses on the federal bank. And before this, they could write off any losses they got. So they lost $1 billion a year. Oh, who cares? We lost $1 billion. The bank could write it off over a 10-year period. And this way, they could only write off 10% of the losses every year. But now, the banks could write off losses forever. So there was no more 10-year. So they could just lose money all they want. And so the losses at the bank were, at this time, at $5 billion. 4 times more than the IMF knew about years earlier. And so, to please the IMF, Jose Jobo Fernandez became the governor of the Central Bank of the Philippines. And Jobo ordered the issuances of millions of pesos with the same serial number. So he issued the same a peso, with the same serial number instead of having different serial numbers for each bill, to ensure the finances of the BCB were attracted to foreign investors, and through Marcos and Ongpin, who would secure dollars in order to protect the official reserve of the Philippines. So what they were trying to do was use the U.S. currency to stabilize the peso. And Ongpin assured traders that through him they could find attractive, secure investment in the Philippines despite a poor economy. So they were actually looking for people to invest into the economy. And one way they did to invest it is to say that Yamashitas gold was in 174 places, and if you want to invest $3, $4, $5 million in one of these places, you could keep 20% of the gold. And so Jobo's duties also included money laundering as money from around the world. And the Philippines once was known for drug dealers and arms traders to use their banks. And they would come into the Philippines, and through the laws of the Philippines, like Far East Bank, Philem Life, and AIG were making huge profits from drug deals and arms sales and money laundering. So the short-term and quick-term route made the perfect disguise for anyone with large sums of money to transfer and launder the money through the Philippines. And this would be like prematuring of bills, deceptive reinvestment options, and rapid deposits in other financial instruments like dollar certificates, T-bonds. Then you just buy dollars and trade it the next day and make a lot of money. And this is all done at the central bank's expense. So Marcos used the central banks to launder money. And at the downfall of the Marcos era, Juan de la Cruz had actually to take responsibility for all these losses at the banks. And by 2003, after Marcos left, the United States forced compliance with the Philippine banking system to include insurances for worldwide money laundering. So they actually had to stop money laundering, and they had to adhere by strict laws so money laundering couldn't be done in the Philippines. And so the money launderers, the arms sales, the drug dealers, all cannot use the Philippine banks anymore. And so once they did this, the banks were no longer blacklisted for some of their irregularities. So in 1984, we'll go back to 1984, the world media had turned against Marcos because of his oppression of the Philippine people, the torture, the murders, kidnappings, and everything. And they started to expose him as a dictator, a murderer, a thief of federal funds, and of the Philippine people. In the early 1970s, college students protested Marcos, and he went down hard on them. And so the senators, like Ocampo, they worked for the newspapers in order to expose Marcos about his stealing money from the National Treasury and the bank accounts. And they believed that it was in the billions. When Marcos left office, he was worth over $10 billion. And so before 1984, General Ver was involved in cash scams involving the Iranians and the Israelis governments. And what they did is they used the end user certificate. Basically, governments buying arms or weapons from other countries sign a document saying, I'm buying 3,000 guns or $100 million worth of ammunition, but it's going to wind up going to this government. It's not going to be in the hands of people. And they were signing fake user-end agreements saying it's going to the Philippines, it's going to Israel, it's going to Iran, when in fact it was just probably being sold to arms dealers. And since they used the countries and General Ver could use his name, it looked legit. And so because this, Ver had numerous contracts with Israel and Iran, and basically they were laundering gold. And so every time they needed money, they would just launder the money through Marcos, the gold through Marcos. And this is because Israel was, there was a what do you call it, a blockade, a boycott of Israel and Iran at the time. So they couldn't sell on the open market, so they could go through Marcos, sell the gold, get the money, and then buy stuff, and then the Philippines could actually help them out. And so Marcos now started to see that the wind was changing against them, started making plans to remove as much gold and silver out of the Philippines as possible, and just in case there was a revolution. And the plan was exposed when Interpol, which is like an international police organization, intercepted a report that 3 suspicious shipments had left the Philippines from the central bank. One would be full of gold and the other 2 were silver. And so they actually found the boats and they inspected it, and the containers discovered a bill laden from one of the shipments that contained over 250 silver bars that weighed over 18,000 pounds. And at the time it was $100,000. And they were sent by the First United Transport and now listen to this, they were escorted by General Ver. So gold and silver was being taken out of the country and General Ver was escorting it. So 2 weeks later, Ferdinand's personal physician, Marcos's personal physician, was found stabbed to death, and in a van with over 20 stab wounds. And it was believed that he was accidentally reported to the Pittsburgh Press about Marcos's personal health. Marcos was getting sick at the time, and he had 2 kidney transplants. And to show that he wasn't sick, Marcos made an appearance to show that his health was not deteriorating. So at this time, Senator Kennedy, after reading about the corruption taking place in the Philippines, called for an immediate investigation into the accounting practices of the Philippines. And basically, the money that was going to the Philippines, where was it going? So he asked the GAO of the United States, the General Accounting Office, to do the investigation on the economic and military assistance to the Philippines over the past several years, and they wanted a full accounting of the money. But when the report was released, they discovered that $92 million of food aid was unaccounted for. So basically, $92 million disappeared. They have no idea where $92 million went to. $227 million in food was misused. So they don't know what happened to that. It was either sold, it was thrown away, it probably was sold, or wasn't given out to people. It was just probably given out to the government officials. And it was misused, and over $100,000 was missing from used vouchers. So they don't know where they went to. So they believe that Marcos defrauded the U.S. government at this time. So within a month, Marcos again would defraud the United States by having the central bank wire $15 million to the Federal Reserve Bank in New York to pay on account or pay a bill for U.S. Treasury notes. So anyways, so what happened was the U.S. government would send Marcos money, or the Philippine government, like $15 million. He would send it back saying, here's the payment. So they owe the United States $25 million. They get $40 million from the U.S. for food aid. They take $15 million, $20 million, whatever they owe the U.S., send that back, and then keep the rest. So the Federal Reserve Bank of the U.S. noticed that the central bank did not have enough cash to pay the wire transfer. So they were supposed to send $15 million to the Federal Reserve to get U.S. money, but they couldn't afford the wire fee. And so they notified the Central Bank of the Philippines, And so within a few days, $15 million for U.S. aid was wired to the Philippines by the U.S. government, and then it was sent back to the United States to get federal notes. So the U.S. aid is money to pay for food, medical issues, and stuff like that for a country. So they were taking that money and then buying United States currency in order to stabilize the notes. Stabilize the peso. So they're basically not using the money what it was for. So so during the Marcos presidency, the poverty level doubled. In 1965, there was about 18 million people living in poverty, or 58% of the population. By 1986, the rate had gone over to 35 million people, and of the 56 million, so pretty much more than 63% of the nation was living under the poverty level. And most of them were living under $1 a day. So the critics started talking about the forestry industry. The Philippines is known for its wood carvings, and they ravished the forest about 75% to 27%. So pretty much only 25% of the national forest that they use for wood carvings remained. So most of it was illegally harvested, and it was all on the blessing of bliss, which was Imelda Marcos's watch. And this is one of the biggest industries in the Philippines. So in 85, the nation lacking such trees would enable the wood carvings for that industry only, but it nearly collapsed. They basically almost didn't have any wood left to do that. You can go to the Philippines still and buy wood carvings. So that year, the Manila Commission had accumulated debts in excess of $86 million, not including the $100 million that in foreign loans. So the Philippines owed $186 million. And Bliss, which was headed by Imelda Marcos, accomplished nothing. So within a days, so in 1986, the Philippines had an election. So within days of that election, the Roman Catholic Church called the election a complete fraud. So this is what really interesting. Several computer workers, some women, noticed the discrepancies and in protest walked out of the election hall at the church, and it made national news. It made international news. These brave women walked out. They thought they were going to be killed. So they met a Rolling Stone reporter named P.J. O'Rourke, and he said, go to the Manila Hotel and find a U.S. representative to protect them. The United States sent over senators and congressmen to watch over the election for election fraud. And he suggested to them, go there, find a U.S. senator, congressman to protect you. So they took his word and went to the Manila Hotel and found Senator John Kerry. John Kerry was the Secretary of State under Barack Obama, and he ran for president. And he was there watching the election. But at this point in time, he was having dinner. John Kerry's a Democrat. Many Filipinos in America supported him. But after hearing this story, if you still supported him, I don't know what to tell you. These women feared for their life. They should be national heroes in the Philippines. They went to John Kerry and said, please help us. And John Kerry said, let me finish my dinner first. Leave me alone. He would not talk to them. He would not help them until he finished his dinner. And he was not in any hurry to finish his dinner. And he refused to help them in any way until he was done. So they actually had to sit there and wait. They could have been killed in that lobby of that hotel because his dinner was more important than protecting the people of the Philippines. That is pathetic. So when he finished, he didn't want to. He didn't even want to go to the church and find out what was going on. But they told him, you have to go here now. And he wanted to argue with him. He did not want to go. But he just figured he may as well go just to see what's going on. And when he got there, he still didn't know what was going on. So P.J. O'Rourke went up to him to explain the situation. Carey looked at him and said, no interviews, and walked off and walked out of the church. He did not care about what was happening in the Philippines. He probably didn't care if these three women, died that night. He did not care. All right, so that's going to do this episode now. We will talk more about a little bit about the election, and then we're going to get back into the investigations. And for the next 6 months, we'll get back. I said 6 months. That'd be what 26. Yeah, about the next 6 months, I'm going to show you all the information about Marcos's investigation to Marcos and all the money that he left with. When he left office, he was worth at least $10 billion. That's what they estimated. But with the investigations going on, it was much, much higher. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'll see you around.